Hi, everybody, and welcome to the third and last webinar of the series, Brand Your Soul Purpose. So today's webinar is all about how to make your brand an expression of your soul purpose. So I'm Noella Killa of Life and Soul Brands, and together with the Evergreen Blossom Movement, we put this up for you. So personally, this is the most exciting part for me. Just as we begin to really concretize a brand out of our sole purpose. So today, I want you to sit back, relax, and imagine that you're beginning to watch a movie. So it's all about a real life story that would impact humanity for centuries to come. We'll be touching on points that we've covered in the earlier webinars, and we'll also be going over the different elements that make up a brand. Are you ready? So let's take a deep breath. And now you might be familiar with a figure who has changed the world with his life, teachings, philosophy, and brand. Buddha's story began long before he was Buddha. Siddhartha Gautama was born a prince in a royal family in what is now known as Nepal. Tall, strong, and handsome, he belonged to the warrior caste, and it was predicted that he would either become a great king or a spiritual leader. Since his parents wanted a powerful ruler for their kingdom, they tried to prevent Siddhartha from seeing the unsatisfactory nature of the world. They surrounded him with every kind of pleasure. He was given 500 attractive ladies and every opportunity for sports and excitement. He completely mastered the important combat training, even winning his wife in an archery contest. However, one day, suddenly he was confronted with impermanence and suffering. On a rare outing from his luxurious palace, he saw someone desperately sick. The next day, he saw an old man and finally, a dead person. He realized that his privileged status would not protect him from sickness, from old age, and death. When he had a chance meeting then with a spiritual seeker, suddenly the urge to seek peace of mind arose in him. He followed this urge and in essence, followed his bliss. Meeting that man gave him a first and enticing taste of the mind, a true and lasting refuge, which he knew he had to experience himself for the good of all. And he knew at this instant that this was his sole purpose. Siddhartha decided he had to leave his royal responsibilities and his family in order to realize full enlightenment. Here, he made the conscious decision to step out into his purpose. He wanted to seek salvation for himself and for others, and this became his big why, his driving force, his mission. He left the palace secretly and set alone into the forest. Over the next 6 years, he honed his skill. He met many talented meditation teachers and mastered their techniques. He tried it all. He punished his body with ascetic practices such as extreme and prolonged fasts. However, after 6 years of this, he felt only frustration. Eventually, he realized that the path to peace was through mental discipline. Finally, at a place called Bodh Gaya, Siddhartha decided to remain in meditation until he knew the mind's true nature so as to benefit all beings. He reached enlightenment at the age of 35. True to his divine timing, that moment he became Buddha, the awakened one. He thus became the embodiment of his brand. We are quite familiar with Buddha's brand personality. He is a teacher known to be enlightened, compassionate, and quite zen. The way he speaks, talking about truth in a so very zen-like manner, is his personality. You'd recognize Buddha because of this. Archetypes are universally familiar characters representing facets of eternal truth. So this is based in psychology by the psychologist Carl Jung. There are different brand archetypes, but if we had to classify Buddha, he'd be a sage. He is the wise one, and the sage is always seeking the truth. There is that one main image of Buddha. You might remember this, where he is sitting in meditation. There is meaning to this image. His half-closed eyes show a state of meditation, both looking outward and inward at the same time. Elongated earlobes hear what is needed in the world, and hand gestures, called mudras, have different meanings such as teaching or protection. That is Buddha's brand image. It has so much symbolism. However, Buddha is pictured in so many ways. We have sleeping Buddha, and this is signifying peace, calm, serenity, even simplicity. We have laughing Buddha, and he's showing celebration, joy, and abundant energy. How about meditating Buddha? Centering, deeply spiritual and very calming. You also have protection Buddha and medicine Buddha. These are all the different brand positioning of the central figure that is Buddha. Buddha actually embodies all of this. However, depending on the target market, he shows himself in a certain form. This is to be most relatable to that particular audience. Now, close your eyes for a second and think of Buddha. The first image that pops up in your mind is your brand perception. This is the result of your own experiences with the brand or Buddha. You might feel closest to laughing Buddha as this is an image from childhood. Or you might resonate with meditating Buddha from time spent in meditation. However Buddha resonates with you is pretty much the real estate that he takes up in your head. This is your relationship to him. Compassion for all sentient beings, understanding suffering, peace of mind, these are so powerful. These are but some of the brand values that Buddha and thus Buddhism holds dear. The Four Noble Truths form the guideposts, making Buddhism what it is today. Buddha says, I teach because you and all beings want to have happiness and want to avoid suffering. I teach the way things are. His philosophy on the middle way came about because of his life experiences. Buddha has known the extremes, a life of pleasure and a life of extreme suffering. Thus, the Noble Eightfold Path is the middle way of moderation between the extremes of self-indulgence and self-mortification. This, he discovers, leads to liberation. This has become his philosophy, the brand message that he communicates. This has lived in the hearts and minds of Buddhists everywhere for millennia to come. They practice his teachings in everyday life, and his message lives in their hearts. As devotees, we can say that they have supreme brand loyalty. So Buddha's life experiences have ignited within him to follow his bliss towards his sole purpose. He was driven by his mission, his why, and wanted to achieve peace of mind to attain salvation from suffering. Because of this, he honed his skill and trusting in his divine timing became the embodiment of his brand. We know that he is a Zen teacher, and that is his brand personality. And a wise one, a sage, and that's his archetype. His brand image is known worldwide, with this brand positioning shown depending on the occasion. You have your own brand perception of him, and that is entirely personal. His brand values of compassion and peace are known far and wide. while his brand message of the middle way resonates in everyone's hearts, inspiring devoted followers and brand loyalty for centuries to come. And that, together with all his life experiences, difficult, pleasurable, mundane, is what has made Buddhism what it is today. And that is Buddha's brand story. Now, it's about time for us to really begin crafting our own unique brand. Each one of us has Buddha inside. Are you ready to awaken it? So now, I think it's about time for us to switch over to a Q&A. And we have a question over here. So Felipe, so this one is from Jay, and he says, this is going to be a tough one for you. How would you suggest converting an existing business like mine towards a more spiritual direction? I've been building this company for a decade now, and it's based mainly off rock and roll, horror movies, and punk rock ideologies. So I recently awakened and have a lot of information to share. Most of my old work feels obsolete now, and I kind of know where I'm trying to go with a new direction. But I'm having trouble pulling the plug on a business that I've spent a fourth of my life building. It's what I know, yet I kind of hate it now. Ideas? Thanks, Jay. So thank you, Jay, for this question. And I think this is something that everybody can pretty much relate to. So I'm really happy that you asked that, and I gladly take you up on your challenge. So first off, I'm really loving your present business. I see that it's shirts with the coolest rock and roll flair. It's already got a whole lot of soul, and it's a very, very hip soul. So I think this question and this situation can actually really apply to many, whether or not you have a business. You know, when we have turned a corner, sometimes we think that we really need to put our past behind us and we need to start anew. And oftentimes we also think that what is material, or in your case, horror and punk rock on one end, and what is spiritual on the other. So we also have our dark sides, our shadows, which may consist of, experiences that we'd rather put behind us, things like embarrassment, trauma, or failure. And we keep it separate from the light. So this light may be what we deem our spiritual side, or what we think is really acceptable. So we may think that we need to put away what is not the light, but in actuality, it is our dark and difficult experiences that provide us the path to wholeness. It is through the darkness and in loving each and every dark part that we become whole. So we do this just by shining complete and loving kindness to all parts of ourselves without judgment. So I'm really, really loving this quote by Brené Brown. And she says, the irony is that we attempt to disown our difficult stories to appear more whole or more acceptable. But our wholeness, even our wholeheartedness, actually depends on the integration of all of our experiences, including the falls. So, just as our brand can evolve and grow, this is also something that can grow with you. So your brand can evolve and grow with you as well. At the end of the day, a brand is really just a reflection of you, and it becomes part of your brand story. So this is precisely the story of transformation that makes your brand so interesting and gives it this particular depth. The lessons and learnings in your own life experiences are what give wholeness to your brand and become the very essence that your brand can later communicate. So you mentioned that you're recently awakened, and I noticed that your shirts have images on them, and I want to ask you, what does awakened look like? What does it feel like? And maybe, just maybe, how can you portray this through the images on your shirts? Think about it. you might be able to impart, that feeling of love, of bliss, of peace to the one wearing it. Now, I really, really can't think of a hipper soul. So you also mentioned that you have a lot of information to share. Now, what is your favorite medium of sharing or taking in information? So you might love reading books, or listening to podcasts or taking courses. So why not share your information, your unique content on your site? People who are your specific audience will resonate with what you have to share. And who knows, they might just be newly awakened rock and roll fanatics as well. A key component in building a following or a tribe requires a way for people to identify with them. And may it be your core message or your identity. So they want a way to also identify with this, with your brand. So, and I can't think of a better way than to have them wear it. So your shirts are your particular swag. And this is a way for those awakened rock and roll fanatics to say loudly and proudly, this is who I am. See, every single part of your journey has its place, and they all serve a purpose to awaken you further and provide a stepping stone towards living your complete and utter life of purpose. This is all part of your brand and of your story. And ultimately, your brand can be the reflection of your highest purpose. So this comes through the evolution. So if you already have that existing business in that evolution and in growing with you, your brand will ultimately reflect your highest purpose, your soul purpose. So I'm open for a soul purpose session if you really want to discuss this further, because here we can lay the foundational elements of your brand as well as really craft a strategy to get your message out into the world. So nothing really says it loud and proud like t-shirts. So thank you for your question, and I hope that answered it. And if you have any more clarifications or follow-up questions, do send them over, and I'd be glad to answer that as well. So I'm opening the floor now for Q&A with the audience. So please do send over your questions if you have any, and I'll be glad to clarify them further.
Thank you, Noelle.
Thanks, Tony Ann.
That was awesome. It's got so many cool points that you brought out. I love how you used Buddha as an example. That really resonated for me. So my question is, it sounds like having a brand, you mentioned earlier about Buddha becoming the embodiment of his brand. So how does someone for example, how does someone with imperfections, you said like having the light and the dark side, how does someone with imperfections start a brand while still working out the splits and separations?
Yeah, that's a great question. So thank you for that. And I think that's something that could resonate with everybody because nobody is really perfect to begin with and to start with. But I think that shouldn't really stop you from starting and taking that step forward, because in line, when you start to follow your purpose and to do things on purpose, then you can also start to work on the splits and those imperfections as we move along forward. So we can deal with that integration as it comes up. And actually, a lot of the things will come up as you take action. So I think it's really just taking like a very conscious perspective and trying to deal with things in a conscious manner and with the intention of really integrating everything in order to to be more whole and more whole along the way. So yeah, definitely not to wait until we are perfect, because we would never really know until we're moving and growing through all of the experiences. So yeah, thank you for that, and let me know if I can clarify it further.
Thank you, Noelle. That was good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Noelle, we have a question from Andrea. She's asking, can you tell me more about brand archetype?
Okay, that's a really great question. And that a brand archetype is actually, those were developed by the psychologist Carl Jung. And he actually made specific brand archetypes that kind of represent like facets of truth and like images that we are very familiar with. So following that model, he has made 12 archetypes, and it can range from, a hero to a magician to a creator to a sage, um, explorer, a caregiver, nurturer. So things like that, they are universally familiar energies actually that everybody can relate to. And this is essentially used to give a personality that's identifiable to a brand. So a brand can have one archetype that it identifies with. And earlier we talked about Buddha having, the sage archetype, just because he was very into learning the truth and seeking truth. Although a brand can also have a mix of several archetypes. So it just depends on how you want to position it. So you can have one main archetype and then two secondary ones to give it its unique feel.
Thank you, Noel. We have that was a great answer. We have another question from the audience. So this one's from Tony Ant. Her question is, what is the difference between a sole purpose brand versus ego-based brand?
Wow, that's a really great question. And a sole purpose brand definitely originates from coming from sole purpose, coming from a place of really wanting to make a difference in the world, really coming from a place of service, and really comes from being in touch and aligned with the soul. And from here spring the natural characteristics of a brand that would follow. So basically, a brand follows from where it originates, and that is why before we were talking about intention, and all that, like to really start off from a really great point. So a sole purpose brand will be identifiable through this. It's one of integrity, it's one of service, it's actually making a difference. And I think on an energetic level, it vibrates higher and also attracts that specific type of audience. An ego-based brand would be, pretty much one that is started maybe to make a profit, or there are some that are quite deceitful. There's a different image, but the purpose is actually it's not aligned with it. So it could also be for the purpose of simply making money for money's sake, and even if it were at the cost of exploiting people or industries maybe. So it would have a very very different effect on people, but there's no denying that that would also pretty much have an audience as well, but maybe a very different type of audience. So yes, I think the main difference between a sole purpose brand and an ego-based brand would be what it is doing in the world, and also where it is coming from. So the energy that is pretty much running with.
Great response. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
I'd like to bring up a question from Sue. She's asking, Noel, do you have a questionnaire that a client can take so one can know what archetype to find out they are?
Okay. Well, no, that's usually done in our soul purpose session, wherein we really sit down to thresh out the archetypes. And basically, archetypes are just one part of really forming a brand. And what we really do is pattern it after the person who is forming the brand in a way that really suits them. So basically, it's really taking, like what we were talking about, is taking your unique personality, your unique traits, your characteristics, your mission, your vision, your why, and your own values, and forming that into a brand. And a brand archetype is just one way to really put a distinguishing factor on it. And that is also taken after the person who is beginning to put up that brand. So it is like a facet of your personality. And so yeah, that's definitely something that we can dive deep in. Although of course you're very free to read about it and maybe see which one fits you.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
We have a question from Monette, and she's asking, how do I integrate in process of branding the aspects of me that I don't like about myself ashamed of, hard on?
I see. That's an interesting question. So how do you really begin to integrate that, right? So you're asking, how do I integrate in the process of branding parts of me that I don't like about myself? And ultimately, it doesn't have to show immediately on the outset, but all of the parts that you've integrated within yourself along the journey of the brand is actually your story. It's your story of transformation. And in your story of transformation and evolution, that will ultimately be reflected at the end with the brand that is facing everybody. So the brand is really just a reflection of you. And I think that it's precisely this story of your story of transformation that can begin to really also help other people, maybe even in that particular way. So whenever it's a really tough period and you're going through it, just know that there's really a purpose for all of that. And later on, this serves as the growth that you need to develop, maybe the virtues, the characteristics to really embody the brand, and later on provide the stepping stones for other people who are going through the same thing. So then it becomes your service.
That's beautiful. I love the questions from the audience. By all means, please keep it coming. We have a question from Tony Ann, and she's asking, how do you choose a color palette and logo of your brand for your brand? And what was your process in picking yours?
That's interesting. I mean, like, for me, it was very, very intuitive in the sense that I actually, if it's for my personal brand, I pretty much saw like bursts of color. So it was bursts of color, and I picked some that really resonated with me. And so an interesting story actually on the logo was I was looking for a logo that really symbolized my brand, which was Life back then. And I was looking for a symbol that could also be, very like abundant and like and infinite. And I found this logo. It's the seed of life, and it was a sacred geometry. So it's a universally familiar symbol. But as I was on YouTube one day, just listening to videos about it, there was a particular clip which pretty much had that symbol in colors, and then suddenly arrows started pointing on it, like this portion in pink, this portion in blue, this portion in like yellow. And I was just like, oh, okay, so. And at that moment, I was thinking, what color should it be? Should it be like gold, or should it be like rainbow? And pretty much that video pointed it out. So that's just my story on how I began it for my own logo, and that's how I found the colors for it. But obviously for other people it's a different process. So we actually do like a reading of sorts, and sometimes colors already stick out. Other times it's a very intuitive process wherein we put together colors, because some colors have different meanings and definitely different vibrations, and so it's such a specific process for each individual.
That's so cool.
Yeah, thanks. So Monette, may I ask in person, do you have a question, Monette?
Yes, sorry, I was trying to unmute. I see that I as I'm trying to look at my soul purpose and trying to see it from the structure framework that you've been giving us so far for the last two webinars.
Mm-hmm.
I can see that there are, like, if I'm a continuum, like a timeline, there are aspects of me wherein the soul purpose is very clear, and there seems to be a muse that's driving me within to express it, and I get to express it in specific items or activities or endeavors or aspects of my living. And then I see also chunks of my lifetime's work wherein I've done something that engrosses me, where my skills were developed and so many other things. But I cannot seem that I probably have left already. And they do not necessarily link to this news coming out
Mhm.
right now. So I wonder, is this a natural process for me? Will I be able to connect with that? You know, connect with the things that I've done in my past, connect with what's emerging as maybe focused, but actually taking much of that passion and the why, answering the why that I've discovered.
Mm-hmm. So you're wanting to connect like the things that you've done in the past to your new purpose right now.
Yes. Is there a way and how do I do that?
Mm-hmm. I mean, sometimes it doesn't have to connect like on a linear level. Sometimes it can connect just because it could also be opposite, like experiences that you've had in the past, maybe courses that you've taken or credentials that you've earned have pushed you forward towards this, sometimes even in a contrasting way, in that, this experience has spurred on the opposite experience. So it's a law of contrast in operation, versus sometimes it's the experiences giving you also the necessary skills, or the growth required to really start to live your purpose more fully in the now, right? So um, definitely everything can be integrated, and it's dependent on how we choose to view it. And if you view it in a way that's you know seeing it from that perspective of integration, then I think ultimately we'll be able to find where things connect, whether or not it's like in a linear manner. And if you want to tell me more about the specifics, then I'd be glad to also like thresh it out further.
Thank you. I'm gonna take you on that
Okay, looking forward to it.
through the discovery call. Thank you.
Hi, so we have a question from Andrea, and she's asking, are there any differences between face value versus branding? Noel.
Sure. So face value meaning how the brand looks on the outset. Is that what you mean, Andrea? And versus branding in the branding process? Okay. So Andrea says yes, and definitely like face value. So the branding is a whole process, and it actually has a lot to do with the core of everything. So whether this is like the core values, the core purpose, message, and this is the first things that we build, and then later on there are different facets that go around it, and that may include personality, tone, archetype, to give it its image. So what we see at face value is the image of the brand, but it is actually symbolizing a core. And actually, the core does have to be whole in order for the brand to be perceived as whole. So this is why we work a lot on the intention, on the purpose, and on the values of the brand, and basically the why that it's coming from, because will this provides like the wholeness in terms of the brand itself. And of course, when we say face value, there's so many different things, like what we perceive, what we discussed earlier. So there's the image, but also that image is different from the person making the brand, and it might be construed differently from the person receiving the brand. So all the other people around us. So, and apart from that, depending on the market or depending on the person, let's say we have two different people, they might also perceive the brand differently. And this is also filtered based on their own perceptions, experiences with the brand, and so on and so forth. So that is why earlier we also discussed on um, the brand positioning and people's perception. So definitely face value. There can be many, and people can take it in so many different ways. And this is ultimately, if you are brand building, then it's really fostering that relationship with the audience. And when you're able to do that, that actually builds brand loyalty at the end. So I hope that answered your question.
That was a great question and a very deep answer, so thank you for that. Question from Tony Ann. She's asking, how does branding your sole purpose tie into the vision of peace and one brotherhood of men, or creating a new heaven and new earth?
Okay. So the vision of peace and one brotherhood of man is, I guess, is really creating the new heaven, the new earth, and of one of peace, right? And oneness. So branding your sole purpose is having people step out into their purpose and really making that step forward to make a difference in the world in a way that's aligned to their soul with the goal of peace and oneness. So actually, in really coming from from sole purpose in building the brand, you'd have to come from oneness already, because that's the only way that the brand can really start to form and really have that effect on the world around, right? So in creating a new heaven and earth, I think the vision is the purpose is the same, in that people who have stepped out in their sole purpose are already beginning to create that new heaven and new earth, thus contributing to that vision of many people, of a world creating, of people creating like new heaven and new earth on the world. So I think definitely the soul following your soul purpose is definitely a way to live out that vision, and branding it is a way for us to say, oh well, this is who I am, right? And this is an let's build something that actually will last beyond myself, so in order to continue that legacy and that purpose.
And Tony Ann says, thank you. Coming from oneness and following soul purpose. Beautiful. Awesome. We have a question from Claudine Noel, and her question is brand personality and brand image similar?
So brand image is actually sometimes the big picture of the brand, and the brand personality is a facet of the image. So the brand image is the totality of what we see in a brand. So like when we were talking about Buddha earlier, like each image has a meaning. It can have a meaning, right? And that might be determined by the colors, by the text, by the shapes and forms. And brand personality is actually the life that we start to give to the brand. Apart from that, also through our tone, through our messaging, and um, the archetypes actually fall into the brand personality here, because then it starts to come to life. Apart from just being like an image, it actually starts to speak. It's a real person. It's you start to build characteristics into it, and people start to form relationships with it. So I hope that answered your question, and let me know if there's anything I can clarify further in this regard.
Thank you, Noel. Questions are flowing in. We have one from Monette, and I will try to read her question. What does expressing my soul purpose through branding make possible more than not having one? So we can start with that first question.
Okay, what does expressing my soul purpose? Okay, so more than through a brand, I think it is more easily identifiable to people, and it kind of says like, well, I want to do this on purpose, and I really want to make this into something like into a business, whether it's through service or through product. And it helps for people to remember that that's what your purpose is. I mean, that's in contrast to just talking about it. It doesn't really form. So it's basically what we're doing with the brand is forming the purpose um, into a material image also, so that people can remember and resonate. And your follow-up question is, why is communicating my why should purpose to others or world important value branding? Can you clarify this question?
I think thank you. I think you've answered it already.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
So we have another question, and this one is from Tony Ann, and her question is, what is brand positioning?
Okay, so yeah, brand positioning is, once you have everything together for the brand, so you have your image already, you have your personality, then you begin to position it in certain markets, or example, to certain audiences. And in the example of Buddha earlier on, we pretty much, he can show many different faces depending on the occasion, maybe depending on the person who's looking at it or that particular audience. And we can do the same for a brand. We can kind of gear it towards different markets. And I've seen a lot of brands do this. They have one main brand, but then they might have they gear this towards like the children's market versus this one is towards maybe another market, right? So, and they have like little sub brands even to make this very clear. So that's brand positioning. It's to remain versatile and to remain more deeply identifiable with a specific segment. So to make it much, much more relatable. And later on, we can talk about how, in terms of communication, it's really getting really, really knowing the person you're talking to or that particular market, so that as to really niche down and make it so, so relatable for them. So that's the purpose of the brand positioning.
Thank you, Noel. Claudine is asking, is that the same as target market?
That's right. I mean, it's definitely target market. And, we can have like a primary target market and we can have different, secondary target markets. And it's actually super important to really, really know the person or the target market we're speaking to, so much so as like to even know what are they afraid of? What are their aspirations? What are their dreams? Aside from what their demographic is, what do they do for a living and all that. And this actually really helps us, and coming from the sole purpose, be of service more, and coming from a more marketing perspective, communicate better and crafting the text or copy in order to reach them. And it's also in order to be able to serve more. So it's just really fostering that communication.
Thank you. Monetti's asking, sole purpose brands linked together with image, positioning, and niches of their own. What would that look like?
So different brands. I mean, yes, definitely. That could be more of like a collaboration, like a partnership, if that's what you're meaning by sole purpose brands. By image positioning and niches of their own, what would that look like? Well, I guess that's a very exciting world, but then that's meaning like industries have come together already supporting each other versus, competing against each other. So, I mean, generally when you think of the marketplace, it's really all about competition and create my niche in order to, and basically compete, sometimes even head to head. And actually, that's why I do encourage creating a specific niches, because it's to not have any competition. And that's a very, very like a segment that's entirely uniquely yours. And when you come from really branding your sole purpose, then there's really no one like you. It's your unique essential characteristics and unique purpose that we're bringing to life. And I think that coming from that, then you'll see, okay, well, there's really no competition here. So we can, switch from that mindset of competition and scarcity to one of abundance and say, hey, I'm here for service. I have my own little pocket in the world and I can make a difference here. And I think when brands of that sort come together in oneness, in contrast to competing against each other, then the difference, the effects are magnified, right? And I think that's a very beautiful world and industry and all that.
Good stuff. Thank you. So Tony Ann is asking, so you could have multiple brands within the main brand based on the target audience? Question.
Sure. Yes, sure, that's possible, although that comes also at a later stage. So the first is really to begin with one brand, and that's the main one, and to really be very clear about this, and to already start with just one brand. Later on, when this brand has been, it reaches a stage wherein it's pretty much known, people already identify with it. And then the next stage would be to reach sub-market by making sub-brands and really differing the positioning a little bit. So basically, it can have one main brand and then several sub-brands under that in related categories or just niche down, so in smaller subcategories. And yeah, generally, it's also a way to give the main brands credibility. So when building like sub brands, then the main brand has like they borrow off the credibility of the main brand and put that in the sub brand market. So that is possible, although that will take a while in terms of the brand journey.
Thank you, Noel. And Monet is added. I asked that question because if people here today are able to brand their sole purpose and link it together, what future that would be niching collaboratively, birthing a different value and opportunity.
Yes, for sure. For sure. Yes, and Claudine also says the communication would depend on target market. Yes, and it's possible to do it that way. It's also, to come from that service, you could look at the market and say, okay, what do people need? And actually ask them. And sometimes they might even voice like their pain, their challenges, and their hopes, their dreams, and all that. And that could be the basis for your offering and for your communication using their exact words. Otherwise, when coming from just if you already know like this is my purpose and I'm very clear this is my message, it would be really clarifying that message so that it will resonate with the target market. But it is always good to start also knowing who you want to speak to. So it could go both ways. It's just that it has to be very clear, and only then will people get it and really resonate with a brand.
Well, here's a question from Tony Ann. Once you have created a brand, how does one keep innovating and evolving to stay alive in a growing marketplace? Many businesses fail to evolve.
Wow, that's a great question. So yes, once you've created a brand, it's alive, right? So you just have to first. It's really knowing and coming from the brand. What are we doing here? What's our purpose here? And always evolving that purpose. So growing and evolving in the direction of that purpose. And we could do this in so many ways. And it's really in this day and age, it's by giving content out. And this is really like even free content. And this is coming from a place of, okay, I really want to serve my market. And basically we keep that flowing and we maintain that relationship with them. And also knowing in doing so, we know what's happening with our audience, with the market, and then we can shift and evolve the brand to pretty much stay alive despite the change in times. And I think the businesses that fail to evolve are the ones that have said pretty much, well, I've done it, we're good, we don't need to innovate, we don't need to change, and ultimately they get left behind. So I think this day and age is very much versatile. There's so many things happening, and a brand can definitely shift and change together with the times. And it might be also offering a different line of products later on because they say, okay, this is also what my market needs and wants. Or it could also be suddenly catering to a different target market, so to create catering to a different niche. So that's also very possible. So,
great question, great answers. Andrea is asking how to connect your own branding into the way of living and or apply in daily life.
Definitely. So that's when we talk about like embodying your brand. So we can really embody our brand by first already stepping into our purpose and not really waiting to have a brand to do so, because earlier we talked about branding as opposed to face value. So when we're coming from branding, when we're coming from soul, we really want to live it wholeheartedly. We want to be practicing what we're talking about. We want to be really living it now. So the first step I would tell anybody who is, starting to step out on their journey is to to already live as if you have it all, as if as if you're already living your highest purpose, because that's the way to really begin living it now. And you don't actually, in terms of coming from that concept of branding, we don't actually need to have like a face value brand. um we can actually live our brand already and then like have that to follow later on. So yeah, and way of living and applying in daily life, yes, depending on what your values are, what your message is, the way, specific way you do it, which is your personality. Yeah, so I think that's super exciting. And
That's great. And Tony Ann is actually doing a follow-up statement to her question. She was asking, the person has to innovate too, right?
that's right. The person does have to innovate too, but later on, when a brand is built and let's say a business was built around it, it starts to have its own life. Like later on, in the later stage, it can actually be run by different people. And I mean, big companies have done this. Um, Definitely, the people at the core, at the heart of the brand, um, and the core of the operations would have to innovate that because that's what's driving it. But what I'm saying, if you had, like example, founded a brand, then it begins to take a life on its own. And at the beginning, it's you probably as the founder who's breathing life into the brand. But later on, it starts to have its own life, have its own pretty much like an energy running through it. And the people who work there and the people who are starting to also take leadership roles in it will also pretty much innovate in the name of the brand already. So that's the power of branding. It's in essence leaving that legacy, because then it lives on further than you. It doesn't stop when you stop, basically. So
And Tony Ann says, my passion is oneness, connection to source. I'm in the process of oneness restoration and sometimes oscillate between ego and true self.
mhm.
How do I maintain and sustain a brand based on my soul purpose?
Sure. I mean, I think that's a super relatable question. And I mean, everybody is on that journey. And I think that when it is, we actually can oscillate in and out. But I think once we're living a life of purpose and we decide, okay, let me fully step into my purpose, then ultimately there's an alignment that begins to happen. And we are powered by um, an energy that that won't anymore originate from yourself or even from the ego. So in that alignment, in that stepping forward, and in that momentum of going forward and living your soul purpose, I think that we will tend to go more onto the path of the soul, precisely because we're consciously choosing to already live and walk in the path of the soul. So not to worry about the oscillation. Just know that when that happens along the journey, to look at that part of you and say, okay, well, that's what is this teaching me? What is, example, the fear, the ego teaching me, and integrate it. So we can do the integration along the journey. And that's our evolution. That's our own transformation. And ultimately that becomes the brand's energy also, and the brand itself.
Claudine is asking, many are not in total oneness yet. So how would that impact branding?
Well, there's many people are doing brands, all over the world. And actually, prior to really delving deep into branding soul purpose, which is what I want to, that's where I think branding should ideally come from. It comes from the oneness, and that will be reflected in the brand. But there are, of course, like 1,000 plus and millions design agencies. Let's say they would actually come from the purpose of aesthetic, and that's okay also. I mean, generally branding was naturally linked to oneness and soul purpose. It would just come from, okay, let us design you a pretty logo that maybe fits your requirements, that maybe fit your, what you want, your idea. So definitely there are many brands, just as there are many people. Yeah.
And we have a question from Monette, and she's asking, a brand is a structure of exchange and relating with the world. It's like a language that the world speaks. So by branding our soul purpose, we're taking the earth step of realizing and sharing our soul embodiment to the world. How was this an experience for you?
Wow. So that's beautiful how you put that there. How was this an experience for me in my process of branding? You mean? Well, for sure. Like when I first started out, I actually started with just my name, and I actually started writing and things like that under like a pseudonym. So I started out as like Soul Scribbler, just because I didn't really want to be known. Later on, when I was putting up my first business, like the word life just came about, and it's so general, And but the thing is, I was just so convinced that I wanted something in a way, something to do with lifestyle and in a way that would impact different facets of life. So I just went with it, even if it was a very general word, which may work in your favor and may be very hard to actually brand, right? And basically, I had done different facets of that. Like I had it related to yoga, I had it related to food, personal development, and music even. But when that business failed, so this was like a year ago. So it was a year ago. In putting up, I knew that I wanted to continue that brand and pretty much just, keep it alive. So it had actually evolved to life and soul later on. So that just came about. And I think that it also symbolized my own journey, like, the hardship, the failure, and all the challenges just honestly brought out the soul. so now it's life and soul. And yeah, and pretty much I realized that it could really shift according to the stage where I'm at, and like always had to do with things that I was passionate about. So the brand can shift and change. But one thing that has to stay the same is pretty much the brand identity, the image, the personality. So that helps people remember, like, oh, it's still the same brand, and it's just maybe evolved a little bit. so that was my journey. And what did it accomplish further for me? Well, it helped me align my purpose, right? It's helped me do everything. And it helps me keep on track. So I don't stray into something that's, while maybe something might be interesting at the moment, I'm sure like, hey, but this is what I'm here to do. This is my purpose. And let me align it with this. So yeah, thanks for your question.
Absolutely. Thank you, Noelle. And by the way, Noelle will be answering more questions after the show. We'll have another 30 minutes to answer questions. So thank you so much for your questions, and I'll go ahead and pass it back to you, Noelle.
Yeah, thank you so much for your questions. And actually, I'll be giving a live course on all of these topics. So based on all of our all of our 3 webinars, there's so many questions, and it's really quite exciting. And so I'll be putting together a live course on all these topics that we discussed over here. And it's really like a how-to on branding your soul purpose. And it's really meant to create a unique identity that really reflects your soul purpose. And so now I just really want to ask you, what is your soul purpose? What is that special something that you can share to the world in a way that is uniquely your own? It might just be lying latent, kind of like a sleeping Buddha. It might just be time for you to awaken the Buddha inside. So right here is precisely the best place to be, as in front of you spans infinite possibility. All that's required for you is to decide that it is time for you to step into your purpose, your light, trusting that the path will open up in front of you. It is our vision to see the world illuminated with people shining in their fullest purpose, spreading that light to the world. Now come and be part of that vision.